Mr. David Sarkozy, and I just don't have enough hands. Hold on. Okay, so did everyone come get their book? They're how much? 20? 25, cheaper than Amazon. He's got some for sale up here. He'll probably sign it and say something nice to you in his book. David started birding as a teenager in Central Texas. Unfortunately, college got in the way of his fabulous habit, but after college, he soon became obsessed. He has been birding for more than 30 years now and still has his first field guide. David has served as chairman of the Houston Outdoor Nature Club, Ornithology Group, president of the Friends of Anahuac. Did I say that right? Anahuac, sorry. Anahuac Refuge, and president of the Texas Ornithological Society. He served on the board of TOS for 16 years. David has completed 2 Texas Big Years. That's pretty cool. Recording 500 species in 2015 and 509 in 2017. In 2019, David completed the challenge of birding in every one of Texas's 254 counties in a single year. David likes inventing birding games and created the Texas Local Patch Challenge and the Texas Century Club. David has written a new field guide to the birds of Texas, which was published in July 2025. David? Let me help you.
My audio coming through okay? Good. Let's see if the clicker works. Yeah, it looks like it's working. So people ask me why I wrote the field guide, and it's like, because there actually are 8 field guides or before mine, 8 field guides in print called Birds of Texas. And people said, did they need a 9th? And I said, well, not really, but I really wanted the advance they were offering me. So that was even, but then I thought, well, I've got to do something a little better than the ones that came before to give you a reason to buy it. And my big complaint about region-specific field guides is they often don't have enough birds in them. Texas is such a fabulous place to bird. It's very easy with some of these other field guides, like Stan Tequila's field guide has 150 birds in it. Keith Arnold's book is the best at 280. Mark Lockwood has 180 in his book. Those books, even with that big number of say 280 species in it, it's very easy to go out on a day of birding, even here in San Antonio, and find a bird not in the book, and that's frustrating, especially if you're a new birder. So I tried to correct that problem. So I put almost 500 species in this book. So I put in all the non-review species in Texas, except for the pelagic species. And by pelagic means they're in more than 100 fathoms of water, 600-foot deep water. And so you're not going to see those birds unless you do something special to see those birds, or there's a hurricane. And I took out the prairie chickens because there's such limited range in Texas. You're not going to see prairie chickens unless you do something special to see prairie chickens. And I took out red-faced warbler, which isn't a review species in Texas. 1, I disagree it shouldn't be that it should be a review species, and 2, it's a myth because it's the only non-review species I've not seen in Texas. So I have a bone to pick with it. So I came up with about 482 or 483 species on that list. So the idea was in this book, if you go out and have a bird that's not in this book, unless it's a Egyptian goose for some reason, you had a great day of birding. Egyptian goose was in the first draft, and I don't know how it got dropped from the book. But like my brother-in-law was in Land Park in New Braunfels, and he goes, I saw this bird. What is it? And I said, oh, that's an Egyptian goose. He took a picture. I said, is it in your book? I said, of course it's in my book. And he looked and it's not in my book. I don't know how I got missed. Egyptian goose is a flaw. But everything else should be there. So the other thing about this book, when I was limited to 255 words per species, I didn't quite understand that limit. Either they didn't communicate well or I wasn't listening well. But I wrote a lot more than that about a lot of these species, and then they pared it down. So there's a lot of things that ended up on the cutting room floor. There were also things I learned writing this book that just aren't the thing you put in a field guide, but they're still interesting facts about birds. So I put it all together. I rolled all that into this program. So these are things I learned while writing this book about birds in Texas. One of the first and one of the most surprising to me was black-belly whistling ducks are mostly nocturnal. And think about it. You've seen a lot of black-belly whistling ducks probably. What have you seen them do during the day? Absolutely nothing. They don't feed during the day. They feed at night. And if you listen, if you're in a neighborhood where they're roosting around, sunset, you hear them flying over. They're going out to feed, and right before sunrise, you hear them flying over to go to roost. But during the day, the technical term is loafing. A biologist refers to that behavior as loafing. And that's what they're doing. You don't see them feed during the day because they're nocturnal feeders. Black skimmers are partially nocturnal. And if you think about it, everybody, we've probably heard the thing, like skimmers are one of the few families of birds where the lower mandible of the bill is longer than the upper mandible, and they feed by touch. They're tactile feeders. And so they fly with that lower bill in the water to when they touch something like food, and then they snap their bill shut. Well, if you think about it, that's the way you feed. The small invertebrates and fish are lower in the water column during the day, and they come up to the surface higher in the water column at night. And so they do better at night feeding. And if you're down on the coast and you're in a quiet bay at night, you can often hear about their feeding in the dark, or you'll see them at dawn and dusk a lot. Now, will they feed during the day? Sure. I took this photo right here at about 10 o'clock in the morning on the Bolivar Flats. So they do feed during the day, but they feed a lot more at night. Snow geese. So white and blue snow geese were relatively allopatric until about 100 years ago. And that means the blue snow geese bred in one area and the white snow geese bred in another area. And that's how they maintain those color morphs. So the blue geese, you think of them as the brunettes of the snow goose world, and the white ones are the blondes of the snow goose world. And they bred relatively in different areas. They were segregated during the breeding season, and that's how they maintain that color morphs. They're no longer segregated in their breeding as much, and the pattern of the blue and the white snow geese is changing before our eyes, and they're much more sympathetic in their breeding now. And we're probably going to have something in between in the next 100 years. Snow goose has two subspecies, largely determined on the size of the birds, whether they're a greater or lesser snow goose. More recent research has shown that the pre-adult conditions when they're hatched more determine their size than anything else, and that may need to be revisited, and they may truly be what's called a monotypic species. They don't have any subspecies. Eared grebes. So eared grebes breed in these giant breeding colonies, sometimes numbering 1,000 up north. But right after breeding, they all move mostly to two sites: Mono Lake in California, the Great Salt Lakes in Utah. And during that time, they're feeding on the abundant brine shrimp and brine flies there, and it's super food source. And while they're putting on weight, they don't need to fly. And so their pectoral muscles atrophy to where they're flightless, and their hearts decrease in size because they're not flying, because they don't need to pump as much oxygen. And their digestive organs expand, and they put on about 70% more weight. So if you weighed 100 pounds, they'd weigh 170 pounds at the end of the year, in a couple of months, 2 months. And then at the end of that season, the changes are reversed. The pectoral muscles are restored, the heart's restored, the digestive organs shrink, and they can continue on their migration. If you ever notice during Christmas bird counts, you have trouble finding eared grebes. But then right after Christmas bird counts, you can find eared grebes because they haven't got here yet. They're one of the latest arriving birds in Texas. The bulk of the Texas wintering population doesn't arrive until January. And that's why. So like late Christmas bird counts probably are more successful than early Christmas bird counts finding an eared grebe because they arrive very late. Cliff swallows are brood parasites. So cliff swallows will lay eggs in another cliff swallow nest, or they will move some of their eggs to another cliff swallow nest. And people say, how do they move an egg? They put it in their mouth. And you go, how do they do that? Well, swallow eggs aren't very big. And then look at that nest. They brought those droplets of mud in their mouth. Moving an egg's got to be way more pleasant than building your nest. The pigment cathaxanthin that gives roseate spoonbills their pink color was available until very recently as a human tanning pill. In fact, this photo here, as I copied off of Amazon when I Googled it when I first learned about this in 2022 while writing the book, and it was still available on Amazon from Canadian sources as a tanning pill. So they have now switched from cathaxanthin to xanthocathalin, is a different tanning pill, but you can still buy bulk in 1 kilo bags of the pigment that feed the chickens to make the yolks a richer color. And it's synthetic. They're not harvesting roseate spoonbills. So the name Balcones escarpment. So you ever wonder where that name came from? So when they were building, the Spanish were building the missions along what is essentially I-35, and they looked to the west, they saw tiers of limestone hills that looked like balconies, and balcones is a Spanish word for balconies. So this ended up in the book as a joke to a friend of mine. So if you're familiar with going out to West Texas, at a spot on the map called Bakersfield, Texas, there's this little mesa out here that my friend John Berner and I we would revert to 13-year-old teenagers as we drove by, and we called it La Petite Teton and made jokes all the way. And we thought we were being absolutely awful. So I decided I was going to put it as one of my landmark photos in the book as a joke to John. But while I was doing the research to put the photo in there, I found out its real name. And its real name has recently been changed, but its real name at the time was Squaw Teat Peak. So our name, when we thought we were being awful, was an upgrade. So there's a little gas station that's just to the right in this photo that you can't see, that supposedly still sells memorabilia for Squaw Teat Peak. And I have to go check it out and see if it's there. I call that the saddest gas station in Texas, not because it's particularly run down or anything, but the gas there is 80 cents a gallon more expensive than in Ozona or Fort Stockton, the next two towns in either direction. And if you have to buy gas there, you're very sad. Red-breasted mergansers are one of the fastest flying birds. They can fly up to 80 miles an hour.
Wow.
You hear, you always read the story of peregrine falcons get over 200 miles an hour in a stoop after a duck. Well, they do that with aerodynamics and gravity. A red-breasted merganser does it by flapping. That is powered flight. And I do the Freeport Christmas bird count, and I'm the guy who sits out there in the end of the jetty, rain or shine. And red-breasted mergansers is one of the things I counted. I always notice, boy, those things move fast when they go by. And true, they're the fastest moving thing out there, really. So the Texas Bird Record Committee accepts passenger pigeon as a species for Texas, an extinct species, but it is on the official Texas list. And to be on the official Texas list, there has to be physical evidence that that bird occurred in Texas. And that means a specimen, a photograph, or a recording, something physical, some real evidence that you can double check again. Turns out for passenger pigeon, there is but a single specimen record and no photos of a single egg collected in Tyler County in 1877. That is the only evidence that there was ever a passenger pigeon in Texas. Now, there's anecdotal accounts. There's a record of a hunter who recorded a flock of passenger pigeons. It took 3 days to pass Wichita Falls, and probably with 6 or 7 million birds. They did occur here in numbers, but the only physical evidence is that single egg. John Kirk Townsend, whose name you might know from Townsend's Warbler and Townsend's Solitaire, died of arsenic poisoning. And so Townsend was a collector and ornithologist, and he was out west collecting these specimens, and they had to like skin them and stuff them and preserve them and send them back, and they were all sending them back to Spencer Baird at the Smithsonian Institution for publication and description. Well, Townsend died of arsenic poisoning. Turns out his secret formula for preserving specimens relied heavily on arsenic. And to this day, I mean, a lot of old specimens did use arsenic. If I go and look at specimens at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, my friend, the curator there, will go like, "Oh, these are old. We better wear gloves." There's probably a lot of arsenic in these. Marbled godwits can live to be 29 years old. That's right. They're old enough to drink. Or can be. Marbled godwits and Hudsonian godwits forest almost exclusively on plant tubers migration. So you think that you see that long build, you know, they're the two biggest of our sandpipers, and you think they must be eating invertebrates, big worms and stuff like that. Well, during migration, they eat tubers. And so these Hudsonian godwits here are in a field called one of the moist soil units at Jocelyn Nungray National Wildlife Refuge. And that grass you see growing there isn't rice, but a native plant called Scirpus olnei. And those tubers are very sought after by the waterfowl in the winter for food. And that's probably what they're eating here, is they're probably eating those tubers of that Scirpus. Spotted sandpipers have near reverse roles in nesting. So the female displays for a male, tracks a male. The male builds her a nest, and she lays eggs and then leaves. And leaves him to finish the job. And she may do this for up to 3 males a season. And so the male will incubate the eggs and care for the fledglings until they fledge. And then as soon as they fledge, and shorebirds are very precocial, they probably fledge in a day or two. The male probably takes off, and the young, till they're ready to fly south, probably are on their own. Solitary sandpipers nest in trees using abandoned nests from the previous season. So they nest in trees, willows and small oaks that are on the edges of boreal forest and tundra ponds. And they were one of the last shorebird nests to be found because nobody was looking in trees for a shorebird nest. Groove-bill anis. So groove-bill anis have one of the most interesting nesting ecologies, I think. So they will form a group of up to 5 pairs, and they will build one single communal nest, and all the females will lay eggs in that nest. And they're apparently can count the number of eggs, and if one female lays more eggs than her share, they chuck her extra eggs out. And then the entire group, males and females, takes turns incubating the eggs, except for one male. And that male is known as the nocturnal incubator. And while he's the nocturnal incubator, he is the only one of the group who incubates the eggs at night. And during this time, while he's incubating the eggs, his testes shrink to about 20% of their normal size while he's the nocturnal incubator. Then after the young are hatched and fledged, they return and he's a perfectly normal male again. Carl Linnaeus, who invented our binomial naming system and coined the name Homo sapiens as the binomial name for humans, his body is considered the type specimen for Homo sapiens because it is the only specimen of Homo sapiens we are sure that he examined. Now, he was a physician, so he probably examined lots of Homo sapiens, but it's the only one we know for sure he had access to. Crested caracaras blush in reverse. So I think these are the same 2 birds. This is a pair that nests at Jocelyn Nungray National Wildlife Refuge. And if you're confused by the name Jocelyn Nungray Wildlife Refuge, that's Anahuac Wildlife Refuge, post-Trump renaming it. I try to be a team player and use the proper name now. So the birds on the left, these are probably the same bird. These photos were taken within 100 feet of this spot where they nest. That water structure that you see in the left photo there is, you can see their faces are kind of orangey red or orange. And then on the So when they're relaxed, their faces are orangey red. And when we get agitated or excited, when we blush, our capillaries in our skin expand, blood rushes in, and we turn pink or red. In a caracara, the opposite happens. They get their skin, the capillaries in their bare skin shrink, contract, and blood is forced out, and they turn yellow or gray. So the top one on the right you can see is distinctly yellow, and the one on the bottom is yellow and gray. And it's light may be different on different. I get to look at the side one here. Crystal thrasher was named Toxtoma chrysale by Spencer Baird, a name you know from Baird's sparrow and Baird's sandpiper. But due to a printing error when they were typesetting it, the name dorsalis got named. So it was named Toxtoma dorsalis was what was printed in the first printing of the publication. Junco dorsalis was the next species Baird described in that publication, and they just got the name reversed probably. For the red-backed junco, now a subspecies of dark-eyed junco. And even though the second printing corrected the name, Harry Oberholzer, who was the dean of the checklist committee for the American Ornithological Union and professor of ornithology at LSU and University of Texas, was such a force that he insisted that the precedent was the first published name had to be used. And even though it was an error, he insisted until his death that they use Toxtoma dorsalis for crystal thrasher. And then after he died, the checklist committee said, Harry was a great guy, but he was wrong about this and changed it back. Alcatraz is the Spanish word for pelican. And the famous prison island in San Francisco Bay is named for the colony of brown pelicans that once nested there. Spruce budworms. So spruce budworms are the major food during the nesting season for Tennessee, Cape May, and bay-breasted warblers. And so the population of these three warblers is often tied to spruce budworm populations. Spruce budworms affect white spruce trees. They affect tree height. White spruce is a very important forestry product in Canada. And so because it affects the number of board feet per acre you can get out of a forest, the Canadian government sprays for spruce budworm outbreaks. During COVID, they stopped spraying. And you might have noticed in the last couple of years, you see a lot more of these species. Tennessee warblers have really exploded. You see a lot of Tennessee right now. I used to see, I felt good about one bay-breasted warbler on an outing late in the season, and now it's not uncommon to see a half dozen in a day. I would see maybe one Cape May a year, and now you might see 2 or 3 in a year. Those species are up, definitely. COVID's over, more or less, kind of, sort of. Or we know how to live with it, I should say. And they're spraying for spruce budworms, and I expect we're going to see those species decline back to pre-COVID levels. Swallow migration. So until the 1880s, many ornithologists thought that swallows did not migrate, but incubated or hibernated in under frozen lakes in the mud. So the thought process was this. Swallows appear very suddenly in the spring. And think about it, if you have like a martin house, one day it doesn't seem like there's any martins there. The next day there's a half dozen martins in your martin house. Same thing, you go in there and overpass, and then suddenly there's a whole colony of swallows there. Instead of saying like, wow, they're really strong flyers and gregarious and they just all arrived at once, they said, they must have come from somewhere close. Hey, that lake was frozen the other day and now it's not. That must be it. John James Audubon did make some significant contributions to ornithology, but his modern record is marred by evidence of plagiarism and outright scientific fraud. And one of the most controversial of Audubon's bird was the bird of Washington, or the Washington eagle. This bird you see pictured here was the first bird in his landmark Birds of America that he published. Well, he was selling subscriptions to this thing. And a subscription in today's dollar would be about $10,000. So it was a very pricey thing. You wanted something special for your money. So there's every evidence. No one's ever seen this bird. Now, and people, his defenders say it's like, it's a back cross hybrid of this, and now no one's ever seen one. The evidence is pretty strong. He just made it up. His diaries that held contemporaneous accounts of many events in his life were destroyed by his granddaughter Maria when she published them. She rewrote them to match the stories that he was fond of telling. He told fish tales, and then she burned the originals. So we don't know, but a lot of his contemporaries who were on those expeditions also kept diaries, and their stories don't match his in a lot of cases. Limpkin. Limpkins are so tied to apple snails that their bill is curved in the same way as an apple snail and has a little scoop in the end for scooping out the apple snail meat. They're so tied to it. They will eat other things. I've seen them scarf down lots of crawfish. I've seen them pounding open mollusks here in Texas. They eat other things, but their diet is about 80% apple snails. And if you want to find limpkin in Texas, what I suggest is you go to iNaturalist, you look for records of apple snail in your area, and you go there and look for limpkins. And I have nominated 2 sites that they found limpkin there that way. Sage thrasher was originally called the mountain mockingbird by Townsend when he discovered it, which I think they should go back to because it's the most mockingbird of the thrashers. In 1834. So these guys are out west collecting, and they would stay out there multiple years, basically till their money ran out collecting birds. And they would prepare specimens and pack them up and send them back east. Somehow Audubon intercepted one of these packages, and he got the specimen of sage thrasher and was showing it off as a species that he had discovered. So Townsend's friend Nuttall, who you might know from Thomas Nuttall from Nuttall's Flycatcher, was a friend of Townsend and got wind of this. And to preserve credit for Townsend, he published the account of sage thrasher under the pseudonym of John Kirk Townsend, so Townsend would get the credit. He wrote the article and published it, but he used Townsend's name on it. So the eponymous names of birds. Eponymous means it's named after a proper noun. That can be a place or a person. Most often it's a person, but there are things like Inca dove is named after the Inca, the land of the Inca. And a lot of history has not treated all these people that well. There are people who generally probably deserve to be honored with a bird name, and then there's other people who probably don't. And then there's a whole lot in the middle that we'll never agree on. And so the ad hoc committee from the Texas Ornithological Society, which is the new name of the AOU, the American Ornithological Union, decided or recommended, and the board adopted, that they were going to change the English common name of all eponymous names to something more useful. And it's kind of like the kids are fighting over what to watch on TV, and dad says, we're just turning it off if you can't agree, because that's what was going to happen. So they're going to do this in phases, and they're going to take a lot of these names away or redo them. But people ask me that all the time, and I think they're got the right course personally. I mean, I will miss some of the names, but you know, I kind of miss black-shouldered kite and greenback heron and marsh hawk and stuff that were long before my name that but you know, we get used to it. But what serves me as a birder better? Would purple crown, green-throated mountain Jim or Rivoli's hummingbird tell me more about the bird? Would black-capped yellow warbler or Wilson's warbler be more useful? Or what I'm going to nominate, the yarmulke warbler. But then you'll lose names like Gamble's quail, which is actually, in my opinion, the first one to go, because Gamble discovered this bird and decided he wanted to name it after himself, but you're not allowed to do that. So he Nuttall let him publish the account under his name. Nuttall was very loose with whatever he published with the names on it. So the article describing it was under Nuttall's name, but it was actually written by Gamble and named it after himself. But a lot of these people who have things named after him are very interesting people, and they're worth knowing about. And I got a whole other program on what's in a name, but we'll hit a few of these. Like, so Napoleon Gull is not named after Napoleon Bonaparte, but it is named after his nephew Charles Bonaparte, who was a self-taught French ornithologist. Charles Bonaparte spent 4 years in the United States, living with his uncle and father-in-law. They were the same person, because he married his first cousin, to preserve the bloodline of the Napoleon clan in the United States. And even on his way, he collected a new species, Wilson storm petrel, which he named after Alexander Wilson, who was his idol in American ornithology. And also Alexander Wilson was the one who encouraged Audubon to paint birds. The genus Zenadia. So Zenadia contains 7 species of doves, including mourning dove and white-winged dove. Charles Bonaparte named it after his wife Zenadia. And her contribution to ornithology, as far as I can determine, was she let Charles be an ornithologist. We'll say Bonaparte's name again here. Grace's warbler was discovered by Elliott Coues in 1864, and at his request, Spencer Baird named it for his sister, Grace Coues. And so that's how it got the name. Grace was just the guy who discovered his sister. Lucy's warbler is named for Lucy Hunter Baird, the daughter of ornithologist Spencer Fullerton Baird, because he could. Nobody else had requested the name. Lincoln sparrow, in my mind, the most handsome of all sparrows, is named for Thomas Lincoln, one of the gunners on Audubon's expedition to Canada in 1833. Audubon told stories about being the first to discover it. He and Lincoln were out and he saw this bird fly up and said, "That's new, get it for me." Lincoln's diaries, which were published later, never published, but were turned up later, was Lincoln was out by himself collecting specimens for Audubon and brought him this specimen late in the day because Audubon was in his tent working on drawings, which has the ring of truth, because if you're painting from non-preserved specimens that were shot from the day before, you have to work quick because these things are rotting, and they also ate them for dinner. Audubon tasted most of the birds he drew because they were also food. Rivoli's hummingbird is named in honor of Francois Victor Messina, the Duke of Rivoli, the 3rd Duke of Rivoli, by Rene Leeson, a name that turns up a lot in tropical ornithology. Messina accumulated a rather large collection of specimens. He was an amateur, but he was well off, and he contributed to expeditions, and so he helped pay for the expedition that collected the first Rivoli's hummingbirds, and that's how his name got on him. But his collection is how I connect him to a famous super spy. So that collection that he sold to Dr. Thomas Wilson in Philadelphia got donated to the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences. Next generation along, and that collection was very heavy in tropical birds, Caribbean species, Central American, Northern South America species. Next generation comes along, and there's a new curator at the Philadelphia Academy of Sciences. And he comes along, and he's working on his life work, Birds of the Eastern Caribbean. And he's doing a lot of field work, and he's in the Caribbean, he's in Jamaica, this curator. He certainly probably would have used these specimens in his work, and that's how I'm going to connect him. So he was in Jamaica, and a young British author was there and kept seeing this guy in the hotel, and he asked one of the hotel employees, like, "Who is that fellow I keep seeing?" He goes like, "Oh, he's an ornithologist. His name's James Bond." And he goes, Ian Fleming says, "That's a great name. It's so ordinary for my new character." And that's the true story of how James Bond got named. It was named after James Bond, the curator of vertebrate zoology at the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Science. They never met until later in life. There are stories out there that they were lifelong friends. They only met very late in life, after 10 novels, and James Bond was a huge hit. But that's how he got the name. And I can't prove he used Messina's and Rivoli's hummingbird specimens in that preparation, but it stands to reason because those were the specimens he would have had at hand. Anna's hummingbird is named after Anna Messina, the Duchess of Rivoli, by Renee Leeson, because her husband helped pay for that expedition. Audubon's warbler is named for John James Audubon by John Kirk Townsend. Townsend was done wrong by Audubon a couple of times. However, Townsend was apparently completely unaware of that and had great admiration for Townsend the whole time. And so he named Audubon's warbler. Currently, it's a subspecies of yellow-rumped warbler. That's probably a big deal on a Christmas count here in San Antonio. You're always looking to find one on the Christmas count, and you probably get one or two on a count, maybe if you're lucky. There are currently 4 subspecies of yellow-rumped warbler: myrtle, Audubon's, black-fronted, and Goldman's. Goldman's warbler, I think I want to see one because they're one of the most spectacular warblers, in my opinion. You guys have probably seen Goldman's. So Audubon's warbler is thought to be a hybrid of myrtle warblers and the non-migratory black-fronted warbler. They live in the Sierra Madre and they don't migrate. So it's thought to be a hybrid. And what's really interesting is because black-fronted warblers aren't migratory, but myrtle are. Myrtle contributed to those hybrids a migratory gene. And then the hybrid, the Audubon's warbler, migrated to a different part of North America than the myrtle, and so they bred true. They bred only with hybrids of their own and created the subspecies. Steller's jay is named for German naturalist George Wilhelm Steller, the first European to record him in 1741 on Kayak Island in Alaska during Vitus Bering's 1740 to 1742 expedition. So this expedition they were doomed, basically. Not many people survived this expedition. They built 2 ships in Kamchatka. A couple days into sailing east, trying to find North America, they got separated in the fog and never rejoined. One ship returned to Kamchatka. Those guys were all safe. Vitus Bering continued on. Scurvy broke out horribly on the ship. They made it to Kayak Island. Bering said, "We got to go home. We're going to stay here just to get fresh water. Then we're leaving." He let Steller go ashore for 10 hours to collect specimens. And one of the specimens he collected was Steller's jay, which he thought was proof that they had made it to North America because it looked a lot like the blue jays he'd seen in a book of paintings called Birds of North Carolina. So he thought that was it. So Steller and his assistants, he collected lots of plants and berries while he was on the island. They drank teas made out of this berry to treat the scurvy, and they didn't have scurvy, but none of the sailors wanted anything to do with any of those vegetables. And a lot of them started dying from scurvy. The ship wrecked on some Siberian island. They had to spend the winter there living mostly off seals. Only a few more than 20 survived. They built a new boat from the wreckage of the first boat. They sailed that back to Kamchatka. Then Bering got summoned back to Moscow to stand charges of insubordination against Bering, who didn't make the winter. He didn't survive the expedition. So on his way back, Steller died of influenza on the way back. And it takes about a year at that time to go from Kamchatka to Moscow. Montezuma's quail was described in 1830 by Irish zoologist Nicholas Viger from a specimen collected in Mexico. The name refers to, I always butcher this, Moctezuma Tlacocotzin, also referred to as Montezuma II in European circles. Montezuma was emperor of Mexico during the time of first European contact. The only connection between the quail and Montezuma is they both came from Mexico, or what we call Mexico now. There was a little overlap in the empire of the Aztec and Montezuma's quail. Literally tens of square miles. It's so small. It was inconsequential. But apparently it was just, that's close enough. Mexico's Mexico. Let's call it Montezuma. Bell's Viria was named by John James Audubon for John Graham Bell, an American taxidermist who traveled with Audubon. Bell's claim to fame is he's the one who taught Theodore Roosevelt taxidermy. Sprague's pipit was named for Isaac Sprague by John Audubon. Sprague was a painter of landscape and botanical specimens, an ornithological painter, and an assistant to Audubon. And Audubon used a lot of his work without credit. And to make it up, I guess he named a bird after it. Audubon was fond of doing that. He would take some of your intellectual property and name a bird after you. I learned lots of new vocabulary working on this book, because you'd look up on something and you'd be reading the technical descriptions, and then you go like, I don't know what that means. And one of the first ones I ran across was I was reading about snow geese, and we talk about, birders will say the grin patch is dark on a snow geese and it's not dark on a Ross's goose, and that's one way to tell them apart. So the technical name, as I was reading, it said tomia dark. So the tomia, I had to look it up, is the cutting edge of the bill of a bird. When we get a little more advanced in our birding and we want to sound like we know something to newer birders, we say like, well, and they say like, well, why does a female look different? And you go like, well, they're sexually dimorphic, throwing out some big words. In biology, everything that has a name, the opposite also has a name, and you don't think about that. But species that look the same are not dimorphic; they are monomorphic, one form. Philopatry, the tendency of an animal to remain in or return to the area of its birth. In birds, one of the most extreme forms that affects Texas is Mexican jays. So Mexican jays have extreme philopatry. In a family group of Mexican jays will spend its entire lifetime and multi-generations in an area of a few acres. So when you're hiking up Boot Canyon to see Clima warbler, you see Mexican jays, and you go like, oh, last year there was a Mexican jay on this switchback right here on the 17th switchback going up to Boot Spring. Odds are pretty good that could be the same jay you saw there last year, or at least a very close relative, that one, in the same family group, because they stay in very small areas their entire life. Now, the other extreme form of philopatry that we're all familiar with is salmon returning to the stream they were spawned from. That's another example. Allopatric, occurring in separate non-overlapping geographical areas. A great example of this that was used as part of what was going on with when I started birding in my first field guide that I still have, the Golden Guide. There was not Woodhouse's scrub jay, there was not Western scrub jay, there was not Florida scrub jay, there was not Island scrub jay, there was just scrub jay. And at some point, somebody said, hey, all these subspecies, they're allopatric, they don't touch each other anywhere. They look a little bit different. Let's break them into separate species. There's no way those Florida scrub jays are ever breeding with those ones in Texas. They're just not. And they look a little different. They're separate species. And then at some point, somebody came along and said, hey, these Western scrub jays don't seem to ever mix with those ones on Catalina Island. And they also don't look like the ones in Texas, these ones in Florida, in California. And they're a little bit bigger and they look a little different, and they decided those are separate species. And they overlap a little bit in Western Arizona, and they maintain their speciation there. So they named California scrub jay and Woodhouse's scrub jay. And Woodhouse was a doctor from here in San Antonio who collected the first specimens on an expedition to find a southern route to California. Symmetry, two related species or populations live in the same geographic area and frequently encounter each other. A great example of this is willow and alder flycatchers. They overlap quite a bit in their breeding range, and ornithologists, notably Roger Tory Peterson, one of the first, said, hey, these ones that breed in willow swamps sound a little bit different than the ones that breed in alder swamps. And they started looking into it, and they say, yeah. And the song of the alder are never in the willow, and the willow are never with the alder, and they seem to be a separate species. And that's how those got split from Trail's flycatcher. Benthic. So I first encountered that term when I was looking up white-winged scoter, and it said it's a benthic feeder. Benthic means it's associated with the bottom of a body of water. They feed off things, shellfish on the bottom of the water, and plants and animals that live in or on the bottom of a body of water are benthos, not menthos. Halophilic, they're salt-loving, so Wilson's phalarope spends most of its time in salt water, and so you would say it's a halophilic species. Now, if you see one here in San Antonio, it'll be in fresh water because of migration. There's only so many saltwater bodies of water you can stop at. Aigrette. Headers consisting of white egret's feathers and other decorations such as spray of gem. Turns out I learned what this meant writing the book, but I first encountered that in another part of my life. My wife hangs out with a lot of people from the Houston Costumer Society, and so does my stepdaughter. And we go to Dickens on the Strand event where everybody's in Victorian costumes, and we hang out in a B&B doing a high tea, and we're all in Victorian garb, pretending we can still drink like we were in college. And you would hear the term, "Oh, that's a lovely aigrette you designed, man," thrown around in casual conversation. And I had no idea what they were talking about, so I wrote my book. Emarginated. So that means just simply mean notch. And so the left 4 feathers in this display of primary feathers here, the left 4 you can see are emarginated. There's a notch between the white and the brown in these feathers. So that's an emarginated feather. And there's a lot of descriptions of birds. If you want to see the word emarginated thrown around a bunch, get Sinti Lee's books on flycatchers, because there's a lot of, the third primary is emarginated in this species and not in this species. He'll throw that term in there a lot. So we know the term semi-palmated with semi-palmated sandpiper and plover. We know that most of us know that means they're partially webbed. Well, the opposite always has a name. And so if you're fully webbed, you're a totopalmate. Pectinate. So herons and egrets have a serrated claw that looks much like a comb. I could not find a public domain photo, and I never got to the museum to take some photos of some toes, but they have a toe that's serrated and looks like a comb that they use for preening and grooming themselves. The holotype is a type specimen on which a description and name of the species is based. So it's the very first one collected. And it's a little hard to see in this photo. You might see it a little there. In the lower right of this tag that designates it as a holotype, you'll see the name in parentheses of the person who described it, and it's Bonaparte. Charles Bonaparte described this specimen of the green oriole from Australia. I think that's a green oriole. And that's the end. I'll entertain any questions. Birds of Texas, I have 2 left in the box. I think one is spoken for. The next one is I have another case of 20 in the car, so don't worry. I have plenty of books. 612 pages. I think it's actually 624 by the time the book actually got printed. Available from everywhere if you don't get it from me today. Samples of the West Texas pages. You can see the Boot and Boot Canyon. You can see Baldy and the Davis Mountains Preserve there in Mount Livermore. The herons and egret pages. I drew all new range maps. Learned a lot about Illustrator to do that. So basically, you do the range maps. I started with looking at the Handbook of Texas Birds, and then I would compare it to the eBird data and see if I needed to fix it a little bit. In a lot of cases, they've moved around a bit. A lot of it because of the Century Club. We found a lot of populations of birds out there that nobody knew about by the Century Club just finding birds. I did the Empidonex flycatchers a little different. If you really want to learn Empidonex flycatcher, buy Sinti Lee's book on Empidonex flycatchers. He wrote a whole book on it. I treated it over 2 pages. I described them, told you what they sound like. I drew range maps, and I gave you my best guess on some photos because I'm skeptical how well you can ID a live Empidonex. Personally, it's not calling. Some of the finches, those photos there of the red crossbills or the breeding red crossbills of the Guadalupe Mountains. Tanager pages, just because they're pretty pictures to put up here. The acknowledgement page, that's not one of my photos. It's my friend Faye Rada in Waco. She had a great photo that I could never duplicate. And there's a QR code. If you don't want to buy it tonight, you want to buy it online from me, I'll still sign it, send it out to you. And Any questions?
If anyone has a question, let me know and I'll run over with the microphone so our Zoom audience can hear it.
I can just repeat it.
Do what?
I'll just repeat it.
Oh, repeat it.
Yeah.
Let's
Anybody
do
got a
that. Anyone have a question for David?
Sure.
About all these anecdotes about the various people. Years and years ago, I read that, and I mean, obviously it's an example.